driving in China, a very different experience to driving in the UK. After going on this little trip back to the UK last month, I really realised how different the driving is here compared to the UK. In simple, I've come to realise that if you follow the normal British driving style anyway, you are destined to never move anywhere and have lots of crashes. So I'm going to take you through a couple of the big differences that I notice and some of the little driving styles that actually are very different here compared to home. So I don't really mind sharing this kind of stuff because a lot of this feedback, to be honest, I get from the Chinese people about the driving here anyway. In Shenzhen, it is very, very good driving compared to, especially when you get out into the countryside, which I think is probably similar to some places in the UK as well. You definitely get some pretty suspect driving when you get out into the countryside in the UK. But in general here, probably now is a bit better than 10 years ago, but generally the rules here seem to be far more flexible in terms of whether people follow them or not. Here they clamp down on it a lot more as well, so that you get, there's a lot of cameras everywhere. If you start to break the driving rules, you do get tickets, and you're getting 60 to 70 pound fines every time you get a ticket. And it works on a similar point system to the UK too, so if you get too many tickets, you can end up getting in a bit of trouble with it. So they are getting much tighter on it now, and people are starting to stick to the rules far better than they used to. A couple of the biggest differences I've noticed: number one is flashing your lights. So in my experience at home anyway, if I'm flashing my lights, that is normally kind of allowing people to kind of come into a line of traffic or letting people get onto the road that I'm driving down. Whereas here, it is not. Here is flash your lights just to let people know that you're there and to get out of your way, in simple. So that can be quite dangerous, and I remember at the start when I was driving, I definitely had a few instances where people would flash at me and I'm thinking, oh okay, I can drive out now, and then you end up starting to drive out into a line of traffic, and that line of traffic is not slowing down. Whereas in the UK, if someone flashes you, normally it's a sign of courtesy and they'll let you cut into the traffic. So if you follow that type of driving style here, you could definitely end up having a couple of bumps. Second one is using the horn. So I was back in the UK for almost 2 weeks, and I drove pretty much every day. Not once did I touch the horn, did I even need to touch the horn, and that was driving in a variety of different circumstances. It was driving on the highway, it was driving down the lanes. I never once touched the horn. Here, you're hitting it a lot. Again, not through aggression, but mainly just to let people know that you're there, so that people aren't kind of cutting in. Next one is filtering in. So filtering in here pretty much doesn't exist. There is almost zero courtesy when it comes to filtering in. In the UK, you naturally will kind of let the person who's next to you go in front, and then you drop in behind, and then you have a natural kind of zip that gets the traffic moving, and kind of filtering in moves quite smoothly. Here, it's getting better, but it's virtually non-existent. So they have on the roads these marked out zips, which also have cameras near them. So if you are not filtering in properly, you will also get fined. So this is something which has probably come in, I noticed it maybe just after I arrived, so 8 years ago maybe, and I started to see a lot more of these zips popping in, and it's really made a difference with people in terms of they now start to filter. If these zips are not marked on the floor, it can really end up being a little bit of a free-for-all. Car parking. This, never easy anywhere. Here, just because of the amount of cars, is so tedious, and you get some really suspect car parking, and especially when you get into like the older areas, the older housing complexes. I used to live in an area where it would take me 30 minutes to drive home, and it would take me 45 minutes driving around in circles to find a car park space. And the car parks are often very, very narrow, just because the older developments, the older buildings, they're not designed for this many cars. Obviously the newer complexes have a lot of underground car parks, and they're prepared for the amount of traffic that they're going to get through them. Some of these older ones are not, and you get some very narrow car parks. So while this video is happening, I'm imagining people are wondering what this little thing is swinging around in front off the rear view mirror. This basically is a feng shui pendant that people hang in their cars, and it's basically for safety, for feng shui safety, and it protects you while you're driving around. So if you're wondering what that is, there for safety. To be honest, sometimes pretty useful here. Another big difference is just obstacles in the road. So I've only been driving here for about 7 years. I've obviously been driving in total for a lot longer than that. And when I first arrived, some of the obstacles in the road were very, very crazy. You know, you'd get some 70-year-old lady coming up the street towards you on her bike with, you know, 30 boxes, cardboard boxes on the back of her bike and all this kind of stuff. So you'd get some really wild obstacles that pop up. Also, pedestrians just randomly wandering out in front of your car, which here can be a big problem, because if you hit anyone, that causes you serious issues, because it's often never the fault of the pedestrian, regardless of what they're doing. So let's say you're driving down the road and you hit someone, you are liable. So again, it can be a bit of a problem. You've got to be very, very careful of pedestrians, and they also have a lot of crossings, so you've got to watch what's happening. So fortunately, the city centre area where I live is actually very civilised. When you start to get out into the kind of smaller areas of the city, the older parts, then the driving gets a little bit more chaotic, you could say. Far more pedestrians, far more crossings, lots of people just wandering around and not really paying too much attention. So it's quite a stressful experience sometimes driving here. In and around the city. But to be honest, I'm assuming, I've not had a chance to do too much city driving in the UK, but the city driving I have done has also had its elements of stress. But I think the biggest difference is just people generally will follow some of the rules. Here, they often don't. And when you get out of the city into the suburbs, and especially into like the smaller towns and villages, it's complete carnage. Highway driving is also very different. Here they work in kilometers per hour, not miles per hour. So the speeds are often not quite so high that people are driving, but you do get some really crazy things happening on the highway, especially things like people just stopping. They'll be driving down the highway and they'll be driving in what we would just feel as the fast lane, the outside lane, and then they see an exit they want to take, but they've kind of just about gone past it. They will just stop. So there's been some really horrific videos of highway crashes where people have just stopped in the middle of the highway, and there's been big pile-ups and big accidents. So that's another thing which is very, very tricky. On the highway, when you're going fast, you have to make sure you're ready for absolutely anything, and highly likely that you'll have to slam on the anchors at some point. One other small point, which I believe is the same in the US, is on red lights you can turn right, but here they've got a system where if the traffic light has a spot and it's red, you can turn right. But if the arrow is red, you cannot turn right. So this is a detail that you have to get used to very, very quickly, otherwise you can end up getting a lot of tickets. If you're not paying attention to the signal style, whether it's a spot or an arrow, you can end up turning right when you're not meant to, and often that again can obviously be dangerous because some of the other cars are coming in from the other lanes on the junctions and on the traffic lights, but mainly a lot of the cameras can pick you up for traffic violations. So that gives you a little insight into China driving. How do you think you'd deal with it?